Welcome everyone. Good morning, evening, afternoon, whatever it may be, wherever you are. But today we wanted to spend some time talking about some new functionality that we're going to have in Stratum. And this is a preview of some things to come. I think as importantly, it's a preview of or a continuation of a discussion that we started in our last Insight class about what we've internally at least labeled user-controlled data, and the idea that one of our strategies is to allow analysts, citizen data scientists, other folks the ability to easily get information and work with the information in Stratum. And that's one of the things we want to show today. Today is going to show how you might actually import a spreadsheet of information into Stratum, and I'll talk a little bit about that and why you might want to do that as we move through things here. As always, we've got maybe not as always, but at least today we've got quite a few people on the phone. So and in the session, so I've got the phones muted. If there's time at the end, I'll probably open them up. Certainly don't hesitate to use the chat feature to flip me a message if you'd like. By the way, I'm Frank Bunker. I think I've met everyone that I can see that's on here so far. So, but anyways, I'm a vice president over here at Silvon, responsible for working with both pre and post sales customers, as well as involved in our product management and product direction. So hopefully I can show you some interesting stuff today and talk a little bit about where we're headed with Stratum. So the first thing I wanted to talk about was just to talk a little bit about the strategy in the last, if you were on the last Insight class a couple of weeks ago, where we talked about data copy and just overall our direction and some of the things that we're doing. And we've, as I said, we've come to call this loosely internally user-controlled data. And the idea here is to provide the ability for people other than IT and people with other than a deep knowledge of both Stratum and the database side of things to get additional information into Stratum. And we wanted to provide multiple options for people to be able to do that. And you've seen things start actually quite a long time ago in Stratum that were different pieces that would allow us to start building on this strategy. For those of you that remember back through the releases, certainly one key component of all this was the trickle loading feature that we added quite some time ago, a number of releases back in one of the 6.x releases. But building on that, different things have happened. As I showed last week, one of the first things we released, and that for anyone that got the notice, and if you're not getting notices about releases, you should certainly send us an email, let us know, and we can get you on the list for that. But I talked about data copy, and this is a ability for a user from the website, from viewer, be able to move data or copy data from one place in Stratum to another, and that might be from one category to another, which is the example I showed, taking, say, sales from a year, sales and forecast for the current year, and creating a plan for next year, or the basis for a plan, copying that over to a working plan is what I demoed last week. But you might also want to use data copy to do things along the lines of creating a sandbox. Maybe you have a plan already, but you want to create another copy of that plan that you can go in and either use our planning or maybe Excel to make changes to that plan and play with it and do some what-if analysis, and you can do that as well. So you could copy from one, say, existing measure into a sandbox measure, so you can create a sandbox for you of data to look at. And while you're doing those copies, you can increase by X% or decrease by X%, whatever points you want to apply to something. So that was one of the first things we wanted to do, though, was give you the ability. When I say you, again, I mean specifically analysts, citizen data scientists, to use a Gartner term, but I think those are the kinds of people we want to have access to this, and they don't need access to the server. They don't need to know. They don't have to have programming skills, things like that. We want people that understand the information that's in Stratum or that needs to get into Stratum, and the need to analyze and work and report on that information. We want those to be the people that have the ability to control some of the information in Stratum. We don't want to lose that ability for you to have core information, say sales, et cetera, that has some very tight controls on it. We don't want people messing with that. We want to make sure that it's been vetted, and we want to make sure it stays that way, that it's clean, concise, and what people want is a single version of the truth there. But in addition, we want people to be able to wrap around that additional data they may have, or use that data as the basis for some other kind of analysis they want to do. So the first part that you've seen in our user-controlled data strategy was the Stratum to Stratum copy. That was just 7.0 was just announced, and that's available. And then some of the things we're going to look at today are one of the things I want to show today is how you can get additional or new data into Stratum, and I'm going to show today how you would do that via data you might have in Excel, which seems to be a very common location for information. We see that a lot today. Different kinds of information, everything from plans to POS to information that was gathered around quality on receipts maybe, or quality during a manufacturing process, or safety stats. We also see stuff coming from outside the organization where you might get information on weather or something like that, housing starts, things like that, depending on what business you're in, that are available over the web, and people download that information. And it's not so much a scheduled thing as it is a on demand. I've got this data, I want to get it up into Stratum so I can do some comparative analysis with other information. I want to see it in context with the other information that I have in Stratum. So we want to provide a very simple, easy way to get Excel data into Stratum. And why start there? Well, certainly our experience would tell us that Excel is the number one place that people collect and do data wrangling and really work on and adjust and fix information that they then in turn want to merge or mash up with other data in Stratum. And we want to provide an easy way to do that instead of having to export everything to Excel, not have the data that you're working with, say the other data like sales, being updated on a regular basis. We want to make this something that you can do on demand and then immediately have access to that and the ability to report and analyze on it. So that's what I'm going to show today. We call this data import, amazingly enough, an Excel data import, and I'm going to show a preview of that, and you guys will get a chance to see how that's going to work. And then the second part of that strategy is really around more complex data sources and the ability to pull in information, much like we do today, using SSIS or other tools that are much more along the lines for use by programmers, and we want to bring that forward as well into the analyst or data scientist community and allow people to pull in data. The simple example, of course, is ERP, which is but any kind of relational store, be able to bring that data in, which has a more complex definition than just an Excel sheet where you're going to maybe need to join multiple tables, reach out for header detail kind of relationships, grab related item or customer information, things like that. We want to allow people to do that, again, from their desktop and then ultimately in a browser, so they don't need to be signed into the server or anything like that. And, of course, all of this is built around a security platform that allows whether or not you can bring data in, et cetera. But other complex data sources that we've seen out there, CRM is certainly a big one. We certainly see a lot of people want to bring in Salesforce information. Other data, I mentioned some of them over the web, weather data from NOAA, things along those lines. Let's see, demographic data. You might get stuff around that. You also might get market level information, housing starts, things like that. So there's lots of different information that's available out there, and we want to provide a way to do that. And I'm not going to show that today. That's something that we are working on in conjunction with the Excel import, though. And hopefully in not too long, we'll do another one of these previews around that. We are actually working with a customer this morning on a prototype on the complex data sources where we were importing some data from a ERP system, but we did that over the web at someone's desktop without having to get on the server. So that's another part of our strategy, is to allow you to do that as well. So again, bringing all this forward into the analyst community, trying to make it easier and easier for people to use and get information into Stratum. Second, and then the last part of this strategy is really what we call master data maintenance. And in master data maintenance, our objective and what we've heard and seen out there are 3 or 4 different scenarios that we feel like the information that we pull, when we pull in and when we talk about master data, we're talking about product definitions, salesperson definitions, region definitions, maybe your geo structures, customer definitions, your customer hierarchy, and how that rolls up. And one of the things we want to do is allow people to add to that. So maybe you want additional product groupings, customer groupings, whatever they may be, allow you to have a new roll up there that you or grouping that you can easily select and then see the result of that in Stratum relatively immediately. So you'll be able to see that stuff. And then maybe you need to add new members. The simple example of this is if you're doing planning and things like that, you might want to add a dummy customer, dummy product for, I don't know, that represents new product sales or new customer sales in the upcoming year. You don't have those flushed out yet. You don't know specifically what the item or customer number is going to be, but you'd like to have a placeholder for them, and then ultimately you can go back and change those. But so new members, we want to be able to do that. And you may want to take, say, an existing attribute for a member, say a customer or a item, and change that. It's not happening in a consistent fashion or a timely fashion back in the ERP. You need that. You need to regroup some information. We want to provide the ability to do that, and then persist that change as well, so that we remember that you've changed how a roll-up might work for analysis and analytics, and keep that in place and make sure that's there. So again, master data maintenance, that's something you'll see coming from us, and is another part of the overall strategy to help bring forward the ability for users and the analyst and data scientist community to affect and add information to Stratum easily and quickly. So let's talk just a little bit about what we're going to look at today. So I'm going to show you overall, our objective today is to show you a preview of our Excel import, our data import, and show you how that works. Right now I'll put the disclaimer out there. Everything you're going to see is in preview mode, so some parts will work as planned, and other parts hopefully either I'll remember not to go into them, or in fact they may not do what we expect. But overall, I have a preview to show you here. So that's the first thing we're going to do, and we're going to talk a little bit about the different file formats that we see, the different Excel formats we see, and how the data can be structured. And we'll talk a little bit about time series versus transactional data. And then I'm going to show the data import mapping. So the concept here, the data flow would be you've got a spreadsheet, you want to bring that into Stratum, and now you need to somehow let Stratum know what's a dimension, what's a measure, what do you want us to ignore, things like that. So we're going to see how that works. We'll see how the end result, and then possibly making some changes to what you've imported into planning. So what I'm going to using our planning in Stratum. So what I'm going to show you today is the preview we have set up is to import a budget set of information. So I'm going to show you that, and I'm going to show you how that might work. So let me go, let's see, over here, and I'm going to open this example. So this is the spreadsheet that I have that we want to import into, actually I'm going to get this into Excel, and that we want to see in terms of importing information into Stratum. So little background on this data. So just looking at this particular slice of this, I'm going to zoom that in a little bit so you can see that a little better. What this is this was originally an export from Stratum, just to be clear. So I exported last year's sales. Let's say the scenario is very similar to what I described last week or a couple weeks ago when I did the data copy. We want to go ahead and use last year's sales as the basis for an upcoming plan for next year, for example. So this data was imported by 4 dimensions: region, brand, product, and customer. So those are the 4 dimensions that I have that came out of Stratum, and I exported sales data. I actually, and why this looks a little different than a Stratum export, although you can see down here the View Detail tab, which is always a dead giveaway that I exported this, because I wanted to add a date in here. One of the things that we'll need to have is a date associated with information, at least in the initial pass of the UCD, so that we know where in Stratum to put the information that you have. And this is what we call a time series spreadsheet, where you have data rows going down the side, and you have time stretched out across the top. In this case, a very simple monthly set of buckets going across the top. So this is what we call time series. And then I went in and added this row here to essentially put a date in here. Excel makes this really easy to do. You enter a couple of these, then you can just drag them across, and it'll put in the right dates for you. But this was the basic data that I wanted. Then further, I wanted to actually make adjustments to this data. This is just the raw data from last year. So the actual budget I wanted to import, again, I'll zoom in a little bit, is here. And I really wanted to say in my simplest form for the Eastern region, which you can see all this data and all these rows are for the Eastern region. If you look in that first column there. I wanted to increase that all by 2.1%. So that was something I wanted to do. So I went ahead and applied, that data here. I changed all of these into calcs that got me what I wanted for this particular using this percent increase. And of course, it's Excel, so I could have changed this percentage, and it would have impacted any row I'm in, or I could just key a number in here. There's nothing that prevents me from doing that in Excel. So I could do that, and if I scroll through this data somewhere down here, you'll see when we transition. I'll just get where. But as I transition between, there we go. As I transition between regions, I think here you'll see this is the last East and the first West region data. I wanted the West to go up by 1.2%. So, this was just me in Excel making adjustments to a plan. I could have inserted new stuff in here, done whatever I wanted, and that would actually allow me to then bring this data into Excel. But now I have a sheet that looks just like what we're looking at here that I want to import into Stratum. So again, I could have done anything I wanted here. We found a lot of people do a lot of stuff in Excel, a lot of interesting things, but you may have wanted to make adjustments to the data, et cetera. So with that in mind, I've got a spreadsheet that now represents something I want to import into Stratum. I want to bring this budget into Stratum for next year so that I can do that. And by the way, as always, for those of you that have heard me, next year in my demo that I'm going to show you is 2018. So with that, I would go in after I have this spreadsheet. I'd save this somewhere that I can get easy access to it, and then I'm going to go ahead and bring that into Stratum. So I'm going to go into Stratum, and what you'll see is there's a new admin function. It's called the data import, cleverly enough, and here I have a list of different imports I've done. So these are just different things you can see. I've imported, some operational safety data or some PO receipts inspection data where we're getting reason codes kind of stuff for why we did stuff. Trade promotions, maybe I've got a spreadsheet that has actual promotional information where I've got different trade funds that I'm applying, et cetera. And then, some census data that we got by zip code. It's always interesting in any of this kind of data that you want to import from Excel. Somehow you're going to want to have a piece of information in there, a dimension, what we would think of as a dimension, that allows me to link that back to the data in Stratum. And one of the reasons I want to do that is Stratum is smart enough to say, hey, if you're bringing in the case of the budget I'm going to show, for example, if you're bringing in product, I'm going to go ahead and look at what in Stratum is called previous levels and virtual dimensions and bring in all the product-related stuff I can figure out that you've defined in Stratum. And you'll see that in the budget. I'll actually, when I import this by product and customer, I'm going to get a bunch of customer-related fields in the budget. I'm going to get additional product-related fields that aren't in my spreadsheet, but Stratum's smart enough to go back and add that stuff and make sure that works out. It also will deal with the time, so we know that my budget in this case, as I import the budget I'm going to show here in a second, that data is actually stored monthly. We have a date on that, but that will give me monthly data. Obviously, it'll plop it in the right month for me, but it'll also roll that up into quarters, roll that up into years for me, so I have a year total that I can work with, quarterly totals, things like that. So that's all things that Stratum will do for you as you import stuff. Another interesting thing that Stratum will do for you is if your spreadsheet that you're importing contains dimensional information, say products or customers that don't exist in Stratum, those will get automatically added to Stratum. It won't get rejected. You'll be able to bring that in and that data will flow into Stratum, and it'll show up under a whatever product number or customer number you've entered that isn't in your master data. What will happen with that is Stratum won't be able to flush that out like I described, where you might have additional roll-ups and attributes associated with that, because we wouldn't have knowledge of that, at least initially. If you jump back and think about the PowerPoint when I was presenting our overall strategy, this will certainly, over time, as we get that master data maintenance piece in there, as you have new members, we would actually be able to flush that out based on information you might have entered only in Stratum and not be coming from the master files in your ERP. So you'll be able to do more and more with new entries there in Stratum. So let's go ahead and just create a new import here. And I'm just going to go ahead and import that. And one of the first things that happens when you go in here, it says, okay, in this particular import, remember this is focused on Excel imports, what Excel file would you like to import? And this is standard, stuff for you to go through. You can find stuff, whatever you're linked to, shared drives, whatever you have here, you can grab that stuff and select things. So here I'm going to, amazingly enough, select my budget example and go ahead and open that. And that's going to import the first 100 rows in that spreadsheet. So this is to give you a sampling of what's in the spreadsheet so you can go ahead and begin to understand what's there. And one of the first things you'll want to do when you bring this data in is actually configure it. So I'm going to open this configuration window here. I'm actually going to zoom in a little bit here to make everything a little bigger for you guys. So here you have one of the first things you want to do, and this is so the import options. Do you want to add or replace what's there? In this case, I don't have any data in there yet, so I'm going to go ahead and just add. It won't matter what I do, but if I already had data there, I could either append it or I could actually go ahead and replace all that data. And then you have to pick a target category. So a category is a thing in Stratum that allows for the definition of different kinds of logical data sets you might have. I've selected my budget here. You could have many of these that you want to import to, but as I described, this particular data is going to go into my budget category. But this is going to control ultimately what we see out here in terms of measures, and I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get there. And then the other thing you have to do is tell us the format of the data. So you can have time series data or transaction data. So I'm going to show time series data, and as I described earlier, this is where time is going across the top, pretty classic for a budget, I think, where you got your rows of whatever entities you're budgeting for going down the side, and then you've got time, months, weeks, whatever it may be, going across the top. You also need to let us know how many header rows there are so we know where the data actually starts. And then the last thing is we need to know where the date will be. So you've got to supply us a date, and you got to tell us where that's going to be. And in my particular case, that's in the third row. And then the last thing is just what's the format of the date. You can put your data in a lot of different ways. Excel supports all kind of goofy date formats. So we give you some choices on how to do that. Once I have this thing configured, I just say OK. And now you'll have the ability to start what we think of as mapping your different the different columns in your spreadsheet. And you really have 3 or 4 choices here as you import data into the spreadsheet. The first thing is you need to tell us if it's a dimension, a measure, or you're just not in, this data doesn't need to come into Stratum. So that's one of the first things. So at a certain level, is it a dimension or a measure? And when we say a dimension or a measure, a dimension is obviously, as you can see here, regions, brands, products, customers, the kinds of things you have there. And then measures are the numbers. In this case, the amount could be the units, could be a cost, could be whatever, but it's that kind of stuff that you want to import. So when you're importing data into Stratum, you import the dimensional value. So in this case, my region is 330 or 330, but I don't need to import the name. So you can see here, I said go ahead and bring this in, and I selected a dimension here. These happen to be the dimensions that exist in this budget that I'm copying to. So that budget category is defined by customer, product, region, and brand. The stuff in italics is actually stuff that's related to customer that you're going to get automatically through what our virtual dimension concept. So that stuff's going to come in, but you don't need to select those. So the only thing you need in the spreadsheet is the basic stuff that's listed there. So I've got the region. I'm going to ignore the description of the region because we already have those in Stratum. Then same thing for the brand. It's a dimension. I'm going to bring in the brand. Again, I would have just selected the brand and brought that in. I'm going to ignore the description again. Same, and this just repeats as I go across the page here. These are products and these are customers. Again, always ignoring the descriptions because I don't need those. And then as I move through my spreadsheet here, you'll see that here's that multiplier that I added to the spreadsheet to calculate over here the actual amounts to make sure I applied my increase or decrease. What that was actually a calculation that looked at the region code and decided based on the region code what the increase should be. That said, I don't need that in Stratum. That's something that I don't need, so I just ignored it. And now we get over to the measure column, and what you'll see in the measure column is here are this is a measure, and now I need to say whether what measure I want to put this in. And remember I imported this, and when we go to my configuration, this was for my budget category. So here are the different measures that are available to me from the budget category. Now this was, I'm going to put this in my working amount, and I'm going to do the same thing all the way across, but you could select different measures here if you wanted to import multiple measures in that category. So one of the limitations is that all the measures have to be in the same category. So everything I import here, for example, is going into budgets right now. So that's the data mapping. That's all you have to do. You go ahead and you map that, and then that will actually, once you've done that, that will allow you to import this data. And to import the data, you just click on the Run button, and that data will submit something that in the background will run, and that will actually happen and get imported. If you remember from my data copy example, there was actually some other logging information you could see here to understand where this was in the process of getting imported to Stratum. But that's happening in the background. As a user, you don't need to worry about the details behind it, but there is, for the purpose of should something go wrong, there is a bunch of logging that will be tracked in the background and would be available to us. I don't have it in the preview here, but that would be something you can see. And you can see these are some different things that we've run and completed in the last little bit here. So, but so what's the end result of doing that? The end result of doing that is a couple of things. I can now use that data in Stratum. Here's an example. This is an example of using data, that plan data. So this is that budget. My plan here is that budget amount working, and so it's been brought in. I can see it in Stratum. I could see it, in a more grid-like view. I can be using that data in Stratum. So and actually, let me just go here. I went to the wrong place. Let me just show this real quick. If I just want to look at how that data looked when I imported it, I believe this is the view that shows me that. I'll just do this for both regions. So I'll go ahead and do this for the East region and just show you the Eastern region data. So I think that it's relevant to point this out. So you can see here's that data I imported. I imported it into next year. This is just so you could see the data that we copied. You can see here, I just did a simple percentage calculation between the two. This is where we imported the data to into the budget amount working. And you can see, amazingly enough, it's at 2.1%, which is the increase I added over last year in my spreadsheet, but that obviously comes into Stratum. And now I have that data, as we mentioned, by product brand. I have that data by customer. Remember, we imported by customer. We imported by product, and we imported by region. So I have that different stuff, and the region is here in the filter. So, but because Stratum's smart enough to know that was an existing, some of those were existing dimensions, there's some things that come off, say, for example, the customer. So now I've got salesmen in here. I can look at this data for my sales guys in the East. And of course, I could come in here and I can look at it for the West as well. I can just pick the regions. I do both of these. And maybe what I really ought to do is this. drill down. So you can see, but now I've got that data by salesperson because the salesperson in my example was related to the sold to, which was part of what we brought in. I could look at this by city. So I've got city information here. Again, that was known off of the customer. Other things from the product that I could get, I had product information. I could get product class information, for example. So I'm just dragging this to show this to you guys, but I get different stuff, and you'll see the percentage remains the same, right? It continues to be, if I'm from the east or the west region, maybe I should have dropped the region back in there just so that the percentages look consistent here. But if I drill down now, you'll see that the 2.1% is for all my eastern stuff. All my western stuff is at 1.2%. Again, that's just how we set up the spreadsheet, and we copied stuff around. So that allows me to look at that stuff. And then other stuff, I got product categories in here. So I might be able to do something like this. The city's making this a little. I'm gonna go ahead and get rid of the city. I think so. I'll just get. No, that's not bad. That's okay. So anyways, point being, you can see different information here, how stuff happened, and at different levels. And Stratum was smart enough to bring in those related things, those things that are related to, in this case, in this particular case, product and customer. Kind of drove all of the additional information you're able to get in here. So I imported this for 4 dimensions, and I wound up with, I don't know, a dozen different dimensions that I can look at this information by, because Stratum fills in all those blanks for me automatically. So another thing that's kind of interesting about this is if I just come in here and look at this view, again, I'll go into the east. I actually have this in a planning view. So one of the things that I did was I imported this at its most detailed level, which was item, product, customer, et cetera. But I can actually now, and down to the month level, but I could actually move this up, and I can make changes at the brand level using our planning module, where let's say I really wanted, this was going to be, I don't know, 7 million. If I said 7 million here, if I did that, now I can write that back. So when I write that back in Stratum, the cool thing of planning is, and this is not related to the user-controlled data. This is functionality that's been available in Stratum for some time. But now that's actually spreading that 7 million across all of the regions, the customers, the products that make up the tip-top brand that are associated with that. So if I went down and looked at the individual items now, so this is up 4.1%. You can see that there. If I drill down, that got applied to that product class. I dropped the product class in there. I wanted to drop product. I'll drop the product on here. You'll just see all the products in that brand. Tip Top only has one product, but nonetheless, it's up 4%. So, my point here being, you can use the Stratum planning to go ahead and make adjustments to stuff in here so that you can work at multiple levels, which is awkward to do in Excel. If you've got all that detailed data, it's not impossible, but it's awkward to make changes and then have it automatically blow that down or roll it up. So you can see that data was imported. Different ways I can use that data, which I was showing earlier. Here's some of those examples. I've included that plan into this dashboard that I built in Stratum. So I've got this here. I might use it in a more grid-like format where I'm actually looking at something like this plan performance here. So this would show me, sales to plan performance. That was purchasing data there for another discussion we were having earlier. But I'll just go in here, and again, this is just going to show me that I can look at my sales versus that plan, and use all kinds of Stratum data to see that data that I just imported in context with a lot of other stuff I'm doing. You'll, in fact, see here where I'm looking at it by salesperson and category, which wasn't data that I specifically imported in the UCD import, in that Excel import, but Stratum filled it in and allowed me to do that. And then, of course, I could use it in different dashboarding situations, so I can see that stuff out here, and I can take advantage of that information here where I've got it in my budget here. I brought that in by product. So different dashboarding, different options you can use to use that data in Stratum. So that's the overview of the data import. One thing I did want to show you was I talked about importing a time series format here. So this was what we call time series with time going across the top. The other import option that you have is actually to go and import data in what we call transaction data. And if I was to, actually I think again I'll put this into Excel. But this would allow me to look at information. So here's just a simple example, but when we talk about transaction data, this data conceptually is information that is related to receipts that we made. We track that information in a little mobile receiving app that we have. So it lets us mark whether something was defective, why it was defective, gives us a reason code. It also allows us to say, were they early, on time, rejected, whatever it may be as I look at that data. And then the date is here. So different than the data we were looking at previously, which we called time series, where the date was going across the top, this just every row has a date on it, and we call this transaction because this is often how you'll get transactional data. So the data import facility will allow you to import data in a time series format or in a transactional format. And back in here, one of the options is I don't have that here, but anyways, one of the options is to specify that this is a date. So you can go ahead, when I drop this down, this actually can be a date, and you can go ahead and import that. So we'll know that, and we'll bring that in. You'll have all the date format stuff, et cetera. So that's kind of the overview of what we wanted to talk about today as far as showing you the new data import and data mapping facility that we have that we're working on. This was a preview of that. In terms of timing on this stuff, this is actually under development as we speak. The functional design was completed, and our guys are working on this. In terms of actually getting the data mapping window going, we're going to be able to, in the background, for those of you that care, some of the actual storage formats for this information, we're introducing some new relational storage formats for this in the background. What that will do is that will actually open the door for some of that data to be used more easily, not only in Stratum, but also by other tools that you might choose to use as well. So you can attach to the database that way and get that data. It also opens the door for us to do more with this data, not only this import facility, but ultimately leading towards machine learning, some AI stuff that we want to take advantage of from some of the Microsoft tools that revolve around that. So this change is more than just what you're looking at here. There's a bunch of background stuff. The data copy kind of got us the whole idea of being able to move data around in Stratum and ultimately make it available to you in Stratum Viewer, so that you'd have that data all the way through into the cube. But also under the covers, there's new storage formats on the relational side as well that are being developed. So that development is underway. That's happening with this. As far as the more complex data that I talked about, the ability for analysts to pull information from, say, an ERP or other cloud-based sources, that's something that is currently being prototyped. As I mentioned, we actually worked with a customer on that this morning. You'll probably see a preview coming up with that. And then the master data maintenance, that is actually, we're beginning the design phase for that. Product manager and I met just the other day, and began talking about that. So that's underway, and we're working on that. So you'll see some of the UCD this year. So this will be out there for you guys sometime this year, and then as well as I believe the complex data stuff, the more complex data import stuff, you'll begin to see some of that available as well. Of course, the comment of don't anything I said here isn't cast in stone, but I believe that's kind of the schedule we're working on right now. So that's it. We have a little time left. I thought I would go ahead and open up the phones and see if anybody has questions, and I can try and address those. Okay, hi. I can hear you guys.
Okay, hi Frank, it's Ann Henderson. How are you?
Hey Ann, I'm good. How you doing?
Good. I just tried to IM some questions to you, but apparently it didn't work. That's fine. I want to create a new ISBN attribute that I can change or update whenever I need to. I was going to ask Paul to create another load like he did for me, so that I could go right into the server and do it.
Yep.
I want to know if I can just do it this way instead of harassing him.
So, a couple of things.
So, okay.
So that really the attribute idea that you're asking about, Ann, that really would be in the master data maintenance that I spoke about. The whole idea that you guys have ISBNs defined today, and you've got a boatload of attributes already on them, but you want to add a new one that is some new grouping that you're looking to do some analysis on.
Yes.
And that would be in the master data maintenance piece that I talked about. That would allow you conceptually to go in and say, hey, off of this dimension, ISBN, I want to go ahead and create a new grouping or an attribute, and then you would populate that. And the questions we have, and this is an interesting problem because I know you guys have a large number of ISBNs, how would you best apply those groupings? Because let's just say you guys have 250,000 ISBNs. How would you apply? Say you're trying to group all those into 5 or 10 different groupings.
Mm-hmm.
You certainly don't want to go through and update 250,000 of them.
No. I'm thinking that there's an active list of 5 to 10,000 max.
Okay. Yeah.
I want to upload ISBNs in a new attribute that I can use as a top level.
Yeah.
What am I trying to say? A top level dimension, so that if I say these 10 ISBNs are board books, I can now use that category to say, well, how many board books did we sell without.
Okay.
And then drill down to ISBN level. I also want to be able to update the list because we change our minds on how we want to group things very frequently.
Yeah.
So I want to be able to just upload a new one every time. So my next question would be, if I did that, if deleting the import file, will that delete the old data and enable me to overwrite, add a new one?
So the concept in the master data maintenance that we've talked about is the idea that you would be able to create a new attribute of something, and part of the discussion is when you have a large number of things, how would you apply that? There's probably some business logic that you would want to say, hey, all of these things that have these other 5 attributes should be grouped together this way, and something like that. And I'm just making this up, but so we've got to find a way. No one wants to go in and maintain a list of 10,000 things, right? They want to apply some logic to group those together and then see the end result of that. And I think that's really the trick for us here. The other part to your question is, and then on top of it, you're going to want to change it on a regular basis because things change. You guys change your mind, whatever it is, and we want to make that what you described. You just go in and change it, and then apply it, and then you'd see that result back in Stratum with the new grouping. So that's the master data maintenance piece that we're talking about, and that's kind of how we've envisioned that happening.
So anything that I upload will stay there until I decide to delete it or overwrite it? Okay. All right. The next one other question. Any of these new measures that I upload, I'll be able to use those in calculated measures on other existing measures?
Yes. So all of the data, when I'm importing it here, this is a good question. When I'm importing this data and I'm putting in my measure out here, wherever I put it in this budget measure, in Viewer, this measure appears the same as any other measure you might use. You won't know that it was an end user wouldn't know that it was imported this way versus any traditional method you might use.
So I can actually create havoc here. Okay.
That was not really what we were shooting for, Ann.
I'm kidding.
But I do think I think that's a really good, in an offhand way, that's a really great comment because we are opening the door to bring in data for other people in a less controlled fashion. Bring in data. We are adding controls. We want to have security on top of who can put stuff where. But you are opening the door to a broader set of people, and if you open the door wide enough, you could do exactly what Ann just described. You could create havoc.
But so with that in mind, there will be the admin will decide who can do this, right?
Yes.
I mean, this is not going to just be wide open to everyone.
No, we don't want to create the wild, wild west here. That would not be a good plan.
Perfect. Okay, great. And when is this available?
It's not tomorrow, Ann.
All righty.
No, it's sometime. The UCD, I suspect, and of course the disclaimer, don't hold me to this, but I suspect that will be later this year. The master data management, I don't know when that's going to happen yet, and we just started on the design work for that, and I've got to work with our team here to understand how big of a change that's going to be.
Okay. Oh, thanks. This is great.
Okay. Anybody else? Questions? Comments?